As an international practice, our office is based in San Francisco, California, as well as Oslo, Norway. That said, our roots are very much in California and Norway, and it's a cross-pollination of these contexts that will be the focus of my short presentation today about two houses and the landscapes. This will hopefully give you a glimpse of how we approach our work. I'll discuss the relationship that these buildings have to the natural as well as cultural landscape, both inside and out, as well as at the general context of our work. In Norway, buildings often exist in resistance to the harsh environment in the north. These storehouses are from my cousin's farm near Lillehammer. The oldest of the two was built in 1715. They are in my mind an example of cultural knowledge built up over thousands of years. These storehouses typically stored valuables and clothes on the upper level and food on the lower. In this case, the family who depended on this storehouse would have starved if the building didn't perform through the winter. With moisture and rodents being the biggest enemies, stilts raise the floor level above grade and the steps are pulled away from the landing to prevent rodents from entering the building. The roof configuration mitigates sliding snow and ice by shedding the snow and ice away from the entry so you can safely enter the building. The exterior is coated in pine tar, which seals and protects the wood envelope, like you also see in the wood stave churches that are still standing almost 1,000 years after they were built. Superfluous architectural elements might present a liability in this setting, and these timber structures endure partially because they're pared down to the most essential architectural elements. At the same time, the culture and environment of California has shaped the ethos of our office. As you're probably aware, there's a certain type of West Coast culture and idealism that exists and is particular to that region. If I were to describe the influence of California in our work, I would say it's the spirit of optimism, resourcefulness, and comfort with experimentation that's present in the work. This spirit is pervasive through Northern California and its history, from the gold speculators in the mid-1800s to the hippie culture of the 60s and the 70s, and then to the startup and tech culture we've had in recent years. Obviously, California's climate is also very different from Norway's. Whereas the typical Norwegian building is trying to protect from the environment, a characteristically Californian building is often open and extending outwards. This California modernist tradition of indoor-outdoor relationship as a way of being and existing has become a definite driver behind our work. Our projects often explore the balance between being the object within the landscape to being part of the landscape. The first building at Sea Ranch is the illustration at the bottom, and a traditional Norwegian farm is shown at the top. The drawing of the Norwegian farm shows the stepping buildings organized as a series of volumes clustered together, creating a collective form, growing over time and conforming to the landscape. In Norway we call this a tun. Similarly, the first building built at Sea Ranch integrates architecture and form to work with the landscape and nature, performatively responding to the strong prevailing wind coming up the coast and also learning from the historic agrarian structures of the early settlers on the California coast. The building hugs the ground and follows the nature and landscape. In both cases, I would say it's an intelligence passed down over generations, a heritage that's shared through architecture. So in essence, we found that our work is often negotiating between these two regional and cultural contexts, and that we're always optimistically looking for a synthesis between them. Lastly, there's also obviously the impact of our clients, whether it's their personalities, economics, the geographical location, and how this really affects the project's direction. At the same time also, the different consultants and the dynamics from place to place. While in Norway, clients tend to be very practical, driven by function, cost, maintenance, etc., they simply want things to be done simply, and this might be just ingrained in the culture after living in such a harsh environment for thousands of years, and also because before oil, it was also a relatively poor country. In California, though, we often find our clients to be more open to playfulness, following the more open cultural lineage and possibly the gentler climate as well. This spirit of optimism and comfort with experimentation, a sort of hippie ethic and openness to try to new things. The Ridge House project is located in Sonoma Valley, which is about an hour from San Francisco. It's a relatively small project in square footage, about 875 square feet, and it sits on a steep ridge site with wild grasses and forest land. It's definitely a wildfire-prone setting, and a big fire ravaged through the site just as this building was being completed. The program for the project is 3 guest houses. It's located directly adjacent to a pool and a main residence. While the guest houses survived the last fire, the main house was damaged, and we're now building a more fireproof main house that's currently under construction. The topography is very steep, except at the top of the ridge. So early on we decided that the building design needed to be a very deliberate approach to the hillside and be placed alongside the ridge line instead of on top of the ridge. The plan is simply organized in 3 volumes that each have a bedroom and an ensuite bathroom. The bathrooms are stacked towards the pool and the garden, which are the public areas, so there could be privacy between the exterior public areas and private interiors, leaving the bedrooms to be more open to the nature and the view. The roofs point out in the direction of the view, with the ridge geometry soaring up to the roof peaks on a diagonal, biased towards the hillside beyond. The volumes simply nest into the site's contours and step down with a slope while opening up to the views from within. This provides a contrast of open and solid monolithic corners of the buildings, here shown opening up to the view on this side down towards the canyon. While they're clearly more opaque towards the pool and garden, which are the public areas. You also get a sense of how the roofs are staggered and step down the slope here. We went to great lengths to develop the tectonic language of the wood formwork as well, and the way in which it's expressed both inside and outside, to reference the wooden barns in the area. In the evenings, the shadows of the formwork become more apparent, and you get a sense of almost more monastic structure from this side, with hallways that lead to open sun-filled bedrooms. Being in the bedrooms feels like a secluded world apart from the rest of the property. In this image you get a sense of the indoor-outdoor interplay, with the flush glazing on either side and the operable glass wall towards the deck spaces, being able to open up the rooms. There was a desire to keep things simple and to use a single material and color throughout as much as possible. The only non-gray material used was white pine, which was used to warm up the interiors, but also to add one point of contrast, and also to add a different level of tactility, that the part of the building that you actually touch, the door handle as you move between the rooms, had a smoother quality and warmer quality than the concrete. There's definitely an economy to the use of material and the detailing, and the critical detailing of concrete construction, because you only have one chance to make it right, so everything has to be extremely well planned out. And finally shown here as a nod back to the California case study houses. This project is located on a mountaintop overlooking a cultural landscape of farms dotted in the valley floor below. The landscape around the cabin is traditionally used in summer as grazing land for sheep and cows, serving the farms in the valley floor below. In the winter, the area is primarily used for winter leisure activities like skiing. The cabin is located right at the top of the tree line before the harsh high mountain terrain takes over. While it's only at 3,000 feet above sea level, the conditions are quite rough, particularly in the winter, where you get hurricane winds and great snowfall. It was important for us to save the existing topography and the old animal paths that ran through the property, so the building is lifted off the ground plane. similar to the common Norwegian historical approach to elevated buildings that straddle the topography. The cabin is supported by 45 columns, which allows the cabin to hover up to about 5 feet above the ground. Instead of being traditionally stacked stone or log legs, they're prefabricated cross-laminated timber columns, touching the ground lightly, sitting on steel feet that are drilled into the rock face below. The roof is overgrown with the same native grasses found on the ground plane below and on centuries-old Norwegian buildings. There's 4 frustrum ceilings with skylights that punctuate and divide the cabin into 4 spaces, with the intention to make it feel like 4 cabins in a row instead of one large space. Opposing windows allow you to see through the cabin and onto the adjacent landscape, so every room gets to have a view. The 45 CLT columns that were pre-cut by CNC support the volumes within, and then the wood log skin sleeves over the columns. The plan in some ways follows a typical local historical precedent known as a trønderlån. It's a very simple plan typology similar to the enfilade but much less formal. It's a long narrow house with a central circulation and with openings to the exterior on opposite sides. Rooms are flanked on either side of the circulation path. You can see through the house at all times, connecting to the surrounding nature. This was the main purpose, so you can always experience the site from every room as you move through the cabin. The circulation path opening up onto this very open, lofty feeling space, yet intimate because it's relatively modest in plan. Again, the arrangement of the plan allows every space a panorama view onto the site. A view at the main bedroom with the mountains in the far background. The rugged cladding detailed in such a way that it creates a shadow play and diffuses the otherwise strict panoramic crop. The cabin is monochromatically wood on the interior as well. This gives a certain calm and comfort. It's not just for the visual aspects of calm and intimacy that's typical for the alpine chalet typology. It also has olfactory effects in the way it smells as you enter the door, and it has a warm, soft, tactile quality. This is a photo of a neighboring summer pasture. The exterior cladding was borrowed from this local animal fencing, used to keep animals contained in the summer pastures at the higher altitudes. The fences are made of quarter timbers of small trees that can't be used as building materials. It's called skigard. This resulted in a diagonally transparent skin that went over the CLT columns. You see the structure is still visible behind the skin. The building gently hovers over the rocks and the ground plane and recedes amongst the birch trees in the summer months. We explored the use of the same traditional corner detail that's used in the animal fence. The log skin was built by the same craftspeople who did the well-detailed interior, but the exterior was done wielding a chainsaw instead of a chisel. In the wintertime, the skigard really becomes alive with snow and ice, and it changes daily depending on what the wind is doing. Here the cabin is almost entirely white, shown here in the early afternoon with a Nordic winter light. On the grass roof in summer, the roof which is planted with the local seeds is now growing in. The fuzzy top moving with the wind animates the building and is quite beautiful. It stands in contrast with the otherwise linear volume below. For us, these projects exemplify the synthesis of our California openness, experimentation, determination, and can-do spirit, and a refined Norwegian straightforwardness and pragmatism. Thanks for listening.